Slide 1. Title slide. Slide content. Oil embargo of 1973-1974. Energy crisis, inflation and global power shift. The oil embargo of 1973 to 1974 represents one of the most important geopolitical and economic turning points of the modern era. It demonstrated how control over a single strategic resource, oil, can influence the global balance of power. Prior to the crisis, industrial economies operated under the assumption that energy supply would remain stable, affordable, and politically neutral. The embargo disrupted this assumption and revealed the vulnerability of advanced economies to supply chain concentrations. The crisis triggered inflation, recession, policy changes, and long term structural adjustments in global energy markets. More importantly, it showed that economic leverage could be as powerful as military force in shaping international economies. Slide 2. Background. Global economic system before 1973. Slide content. Bretton Woods system collapse in 1971. Rising global demand for oil. Increasing dependence on Middle East oil. Industrial economies reliant on cheap energy. Before the oil embargo, the global economic system was already undergoing structural transformation. The Bretton Woods system, which had stabilized exchange rates since the Second World War, collapsed in 1971 when the United States ended the dollar convertibility into gold. This event created currency correction. This event created currency instability and increased uncertainty in global trade. At the same time, industrial economies were experiencing rapid economic expansion, increasing the demand for oil. Oil had become the dominant source of energy for transportation, electricity generation, manufacturing, and military logistics. Western economies, particularly the United States and European nations, had become increasingly dependent on oil imports from the Middle East. This dependency created structural vulnerability because energy supply was concentrated in politically volatile regions. Slide 3. Immediate trigger, the Yom Kippur War. Slide content. October 1973, war between Israel and Arab states. The US provided military support to Israel. Arab oil producers retaliated strategically, oil used as an economic weapon. The immediate trigger for the embargo was the Yom Kippur War of October 1973. Egypt and Syria launched a coordinated military attack against Israel in an attempt to regain territories lost during the Six Days War of 1967. The United States provided military assistance to Israel, which was perceived by the Arab states as a direct intervention in the conflict. Pardon, in response, Arab oil producing nations decided to impose economic costs on the United States and its allies. Oil exports were reduced and embargoes were imposed on countries supporting Israel. The decision marked a significant shift in international relations because it demonstrated that economic resources could be used strategically to influence political decisions. Oil was transformed from a commodity into an instrument of geopolitical leverage. Slide 4. What was the embargo? Slide content. OAPEC restricted oil exports to US and allies. Production costs reduced global supply. Oil prices increased rapidly. Energy shortages occurred worldwide. The oil embargo was implemented by the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries known as OAPEC. Members Member countries reduced oil production and restricted exports to nations supporting Israel. The restrictions in oil supply created immediate shortage in global energy markets. Oil prices increased dramatically, rising from approximately $2.90 per barrel before the crisis to over $11 per barrel within a few months. The sudden price increase affected transportation costs, manufacturing expenses, and consumer prices across multiple industries. Gasoline shortages became common and long lines formed at fuel stations. The embargo demonstrated how quickly supply shocks can disrupt economic stability when critical resources are concentrated in a limited number of producing countries. Slide 5. Oil price shock. Slide content. Oil price increased nearly 4 times. Energy costs affected all countries. Correction. Energy costs affected all industries. Transportation and manufacturing impacted. Global inflation increased rapidly. One of the most dramatic consequences of the embargo was the rapid increase in oil prices. The price of crude oil rose nearly fourfold within a short period of time. Because oil is a fundamental input for most economic activities, the price increase had cascading effects throughout the global economy. Transportation costs increased, which affected trade and logistics. Manufacturing became more expensive due to higher energy costs. Agricultural production also became more costly because modern farming relies on fuel powered machinery and petroleum based fertilizers. The oil price shock demonstrated the interconnected nature of economic systems where changes in one sector can generate widespread effects across multiple industries. Slide 6. Gas shortages and public reaction. Slide content. Fuel rationing introduced long lines at gas stations, panic buying behavior, reduced consumer confidence. The oil crisis created visible disruptions in everyday life. Gasoline shortages forced governments to introduce rationing systems. In the United States, consumers experienced long waiting times at fuel stations. Panic buying behavior increased pressure on supply systems. Reduced consumer confidence contributed to a slower economic activity. These visible signs of crisis reinforce public awareness of energy dependence. The psychological impact of the crisis was significant as consumers began to recognize that economic stability could be disrupted by geopolitical events occurring thousands of miles away. Slide 7. Inflation and economic instability. Slide content. Rising energy prices increased production costs. Inflation increased globally. Economic growth slowed stagnation. Economic growth slowed. Stagnation emerged. The oil embargo contributed significantly to inflation during the 1970s. Higher energy prices increased production costs across industries, leading to higher prices for goods and services. Economic growth slowed as business faced increased expenses and reduced consumer demand. The combination of high inflation and low economic growth became known as stagflation. Traditional economic theories had not predicted this situation because inflation and unemployment were expected to have an inverse effect. Correction. Traditional economic theories had not predicted this situation because inflation and unemployment were expected to have an inverse relationship. The crisis forced economists to reconsider existing macroeconomic models and develop new theoretical frameworks to explain stagnation dynamics. Slide 8. Role of OPEC. Slide content. OPEC coordinated oil production levels, controlled significant share of global supply, increased bargaining power of producers, shifted economic power balance. The oil crisis demonstrated the strategic influence of OPEC in global energy markets. By coordinating production decisions, OPEC members countries were able to influence global oil prices. The concentration of supply among a limited number of producers increased their bargaining power. Oil exporting countries gained increased revenue and geopolitical influence. The shift in economic power challenged the dominance of industrial economies and created a more complex structure of global interdependence. Slide 9. The impact on the United States. Slide content. Increased inflation and unemployment, energy policy reforms introduced, strategic petroleum reserves created, focus on energy independence. The United States experienced significant economic challenges as a result of an oil embargo. Inflation increased, economic growth slowed, and unemployment rose. Policymakers introduced new energy policies to reduce dependence on foreign oil. Strategic petroleum reserves were established to provide emergency supply during future crises. Investments increased in domestic energy production and alternative energy sources. The crisis influenced long-term economic policy decisions aimed at improving energy security. Slide 10. Global consequences. Slide content. Redistribution of global wealth. Oil exporting nations gained revenue. Increased geopolitical influence of Middle East. Changes in international relations. Oil exporting countries experienced significant increases in revenue following the price increases. These revenues enabled investment in infrastructure, financial assets, and international influence. Middle Eastern countries gained increased geopolitical importance due to their role in global energy supply. The redistribution of wealth altered diplomatic relationships between producers and consumer nations. Energy diplomacy became a central component of international relations. Slide 11. Long term structural changes. Slide content: increased energy efficiency, development of alternative energy, diversification of supply sources, stronger risk management strategies. The oil crisis encouraged structural changes in global energy systems. Governments invested in alternative energy sources such as nuclear power, wind, and solar energy. Technological innovation improved energy efficiency in transportation and manufacturing. Countries diversified their supply sources to reduce dependence on a single region. Risk management strategies became more important in economic planning. The crisis demonstrated the importance of resilience in complex economic systems. Slide 12. Economic lessons. Slide content. Supply shocks can destabilize economies. Resource concentration creates vulnerability. Geopolitics influence economic outcomes. Energy security is national security. The oil embargo provided several important economic lessons. Supply shocks can generate widespread instability when economies rely heavily on critical inputs. Concentration of resource production creates strategic vulnerability. Economic outcomes are influenced not only by market forces but by geopolitical decisions. Energy security became recognized as an essential component of national security strategy. Slide 13. Conclusion. Slide content. Oil became a geopolitical weapon. Crisis reshaped global power structures, changed economic policy frameworks. Impact continues even today. The oil embargo of 1973 to 1974 demonstrated that control over natural resources can generate significant geopolitical influence. The crisis reshaped global power structure by increasing the strategic importance of energy supply. Economic policies evolved to address supply shocks and inflationary dynamics. The lessons of the crisis continue to influence modern energy policy, international relations, and macroeconomic theory. The oil embargo remains one of the most significant examples of how economic interdependence can be transformed into strategic leverage. Thank you very much.